Imagine this. Every smartphone, laptop, and electric car you use has a story. But for decades, that story began in China, the world's factory. From Shenzhen to Guangzhou, China built entire cities around factories, logistics hubs, and supply chains so efficient that products could move from idea to shelf in just a few weeks. But today, something is quietly shifting behind the scenes. Factories are moving slowly, almost invisibly, from China to countries like India and Vietnam. This isn't a headline-grabbing trade war story. It's a fundamental reshaping of how the world makes stuff. Your next phone or EV might have started its life halfway across the world, somewhere entirely unexpected. To understand why the world is suddenly looking beyond China, we first need to see why it became the factory of the world in the first place. China didn't just dominate by accident. For decades, it built a system that made manufacturing almost effortless. It has a massive labor pool. Millions of workers trained in assembly lines, logistics, and technical skills. Cities like Shenzhen became hubs where factories, suppliers, and shipping centers were all interconnected. Need a microchip, a battery, or a precision part? In China, it could arrive in hours, not weeks. Speed, reliability, and scale became China's superpowers. Companies could produce millions of smartphones or cars with confidence that deadlines would be met and quality would be consistent. No other country could match that combination. That question set the stage for a search for alternatives, a search that would lead investors' eyes to India and Vietnam. As companies began to rethink China, their attention turned to new frontiers, countries that promised growth, cheap labor, and untapped potential. India and Vietnam suddenly appeared on the global manufacturing map. Why them? For starters, both countries have young, growing populations hungry for jobs. Labor costs are lower than in China, meaning companies could save billions while still scaling production. Infrastructure is improving rapidly. New ports, industrial zones, and highways are being built to handle large volumes of goods. India's government launched the Make in India campaign, inviting foreign companies to invest with incentives, tax breaks, and promises of support. Vietnam, meanwhile, positioned itself as a highly export-friendly nation, attracting manufacturers with low tariffs and quick approvals. Investors saw opportunity. These countries felt like the next China, a place where global supply chains could continue without the rising costs and political uncertainty China now faced. For a moment, optimism was sky high. It seemed the world's factories might have a new home. But as with any big shift, the reality on the ground would be far more complicated than the headlines suggested. India wasn't just sitting back and hoping companies would come. It had a plan, and it was bold. The Make in India campaign, launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, was more than a slogan. It was a national mission. The goal? To turn India into a global manufacturing powerhouse capable of rivaling China by the year 2048. The strategy was multi-layered. The government offered billions of dollars in incentives, created special economic zones with world-class facilities, and promised streamlined approvals for foreign companies. Roads, ports, and industrial parks were being upgraded specifically to handle large-scale manufacturing. Think of it as building a launch pad. India wanted factories to arrive and take off immediately, without the usual delays. In 2022 alone, India's manufacturing sector attracted over $11 billion in foreign investment. That included electronics, automotive, and tech companies looking for alternatives to China. The country also leveraged its massive labor pool, over 500 million people under the age of 25, to promise a workforce that was not just abundant, but trainable and adaptable. The global context made India's rise feel inevitable. Rising tensions between the United States and China, combined with calls from Washington for companies to de-risk their supply chains, positioned India as the perfect alternative. It wasn't just about labor costs, it was about geopolitics, opportunity, and timing. Media outlets celebrated each new factory as a victory. Government officials highlighted every investment as proof of progress, and investors saw India as the next frontier, a place where fortunes could be made by getting in early. For a moment, it felt like history was repeating itself. India could become the new China. Yet beneath the headlines, a quieter story was forming. Ambition met reality, and the challenges of building a global manufacturing hub, power grids, logistics, skilled labor, regulations, would soon test even the most optimistic projections. Enter Foxconn, the world's largest electronics manufacturer and the company behind most of Apple's iPhones. When Foxconn announced plans to expand into India, It wasn't just a business decision, it was a statement. This was a vote of confidence in India's potential to become a global manufacturing hub. The move generated massive excitement. Media outlets hailed it as a turning point. India was no longer just a market for tech products, it was becoming part of the supply chain itself. Politicians celebrated, investors cheered, and the Modi government proudly showcased the deal as proof that Make in India was working. For Foxconn, the stakes were enormous. Setting up operations in a new country at this scale involves hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of thousands of workers, and a complex web of suppliers. It wasn't just about producing phones. It was about testing India's infrastructure, workforce, and regulatory environment at the highest level. In short, the company was betting that India could deliver the same efficiency, quality, and speed that China had mastered over decades. The world was watching, and expectations were sky high. But as ambitious as the plan was, the reality of executing it would soon collide with India's growing, but still imperfect, industrial ecosystem. At first, Foxconn's move to India looked like a success story waiting to happen, but soon reality began to clash with expectation. India's infrastructure, while improving, wasn't yet ready for the scale and precision a company like Foxconn demanded. Power outages were common, halting production lines for hours or even days. Roads, ports, and logistics networks were less reliable than in China, creating bottlenecks that slowed shipments and frustrated clients. Then there was the issue of workforce experience. India has a massive labor pool, but many workers lack the technical training and industrial discipline Foxconn needed. Engineers were in short supply, and quality control was inconsistent. Production teams had to spend extra time training staff, which stretched deadlines and increased costs. Perhaps the most alarming challenge was yield rates, the percentage of products that pass inspection and are ready to ship. In Foxconn's Indian factories, yield rates fell to around 50%. Imagine a bakery where half the bread burned every day. Not only is it wasteful, but it's also unsustainable when you're producing millions of devices for global markets. These operational challenges weren't just numbers. They affected people, schedules, and relationships with clients. Foxconn was learning that scaling a global factory isn't as simple as opening a new building. It requires an ecosystem of infrastructure, talent, and experience that India was still developing. Even as Foxconn struggled with operational hurdles, a new challenge emerged: India's policy environment. Suddenly, running a factory wasn't just about logistics or labor. It was about navigating complex regulations, fines, and government scrutiny. In 2023 alone, nearly 2,800 foreign companies operating in India faced penalties, restrictions, or investigations. The reasons ranged from underpaid taxes to vague violations involving tariffs, patents, or compliance rules. Even Apple, a global tech icon, wasn't spared. For companies trying to establish predictable long-term operations, this sent a clear message: India could be unpredictable for foreign investors. Government pressure wasn't just financial. Around the same time, India tightened rules on Chinese involvement in its economy. Visas for Chinese engineers and technicians, many of whom were critical for production, became harder to obtain. Without these experts on site, technical problems grew worse, yield rates fell, and quality standards became harder to maintain. The combination of bureaucracy, legal uncertainty, and shifting policies began to erode the trust that had brought companies like Foxconn to India in the first place. What started as a promising opportunity was beginning to feel like a minefield, raising the question: could India truly deliver on its promise, or was the risk now too high? Beyond operational hurdles and regulatory pressure, Foxconn faced another major obstacle: supply chain complexity. Unlike China, which has almost every industrial category in one place, India still relied heavily on imported components, many of them from China itself. That meant even simple parts could get stuck in customs for days or weeks. Political tensions and sudden rule changes added more delays. In some cases, shipments of critical components sat idle at ports, halting entire production lines. Imagine trying to bake a cake but missing half the ingredients. You can't proceed without them. Visa restrictions for Chinese engineers made things worse. These technicians had years of experience and were essential for troubleshooting production issues and maintaining quality. Without them, even minor problems could snowball into major delays. All these factors, import dependence, red tape, and a shortage of skilled experts, slowed production, increased costs, and frustrated clients. The dream of India as a seamless alternative to China was colliding with the practical reality. Building a global-scale supply chain requires not just ambition, but experience, infrastructure, and predictability. By mid-2024, Foxconn had reached a breaking point. Years of struggling with low productivity, inconsistent quality, unpredictable regulations, and mounting operational costs had taken their toll. What began as a bold bet on India's potential had turned into a cautionary tale. The company made a dramatic announcement. It would invest $1 billion to build a brand new headquarters in Hunan, China. But this wasn't just about a flashy office. It was a full-scale strategic pivot. Foxconn's investment included 7 major projects, covering research and development centers, headquarters management, supply chain operations, and strategic industrial development. At the heart of this plan was a focus on the future of transportation electric vehicles. Foxconn aimed to launch multiple EV-related projects in China, from test car production to battery technology research and large-scale manufacturing installations. The message was clear. The company wasn't retreating. It was doubling down on a place where it knew it could succeed. Why China? Despite rising wages and global political tensions, China offered what India couldn't: reliable infrastructure, a skilled workforce, mature supply chains, and predictable government support. In China, Foxconn could produce at scale, maintain high-quality standards, and innovate without constant interruptions. This move marked a turning point, not just for Foxconn, but for the global manufacturing landscape. The company's retreat from India highlighted a hard truth: ambition and potential aren't enough. Execution, stability, and trust are what make or break the world's biggest factories. Foxconn's decision would soon send ripples across the industry, signaling to other companies that India, while promising, was not yet ready for prime time. The world was about to learn a critical lesson about the limits of potential versus the certainty of proven systems. Foxconn wasn't alone in reconsidering India. Its biggest customer, Apple, quietly began pulling key parts of its production back to China, especially higher-end devices. This was a big deal. Apple had been one of the loudest voices pushing for supply chain diversification, heavily investing in India, and even collaborating with the government to expand local assembly. But, the challenges became too visible to ignore. Low yield rates, infrastructure gaps, regulatory hurdles, and labor training issues made scaling in India slower and riskier than anyone had really anticipated. Apple realized that shifting production isn't as simple as moving a factory across a map. Precision, speed, and trust matter at their scale. The company's quiet retreat sent a signal across the industry. If Apple, the world's most valuable tech company, couldn't make India work seamlessly, what hope did smaller manufacturers have? Many began rethinking their expansion plans, slowing investments, or just maintaining a heavier reliance on China. The lesson was clear: diversification may sound smart in theory, but execution and reliability often trump strategy on paper. The Foxconn-Apple story wasn't an isolated incident. It was a cautionary tale for the entire global manufacturing ecosystem. So why does China continue to dominate global manufacturing, even as wages rise and geopolitical tensions grow? The answer comes down to 3 critical factors: infrastructure, talent, and scale. First, infrastructure. China's factory zones aren't just buildings with machines. They're entire ecosystems. Roads, ports, power grids, and railways are designed to move massive volumes quickly and efficiently. Need a component for a smartphone or EV? It can arrive in hours, not days. In India, by contrast, a power outage or clogged highway can halt production for a week or more. Second, talent. China has spent decades building a skilled workforce. Factory workers, engineers, logistics experts, and supply chain managers are everywhere. They can troubleshoot problems fast, train new employees efficiently, and maintain high-quality standards. This level of expertise doesn't appear overnight. Third, scale. China is the only country with a complete industrial ecosystem, from basic materials to high-end tech components, all concentrated within a few provinces. Rare earth metals, lithium batteries, precision parts, and shipping hubs are all close together. Companies can produce, assemble, and ship at a speed and volume no other country can match. Yes, India and Vietnam have potential, but potential is not the same as readiness. China has already built the systems others are still dreaming about. For companies like Foxconn and Apple, that difference is worth billions. India's Make in India campaign was bold, almost audacious. The government pledged billions, built modern industrial zones, and rolled out incentives to attract foreign companies. On paper, it looked perfect. A massive workforce, growing infrastructure, and global support for companies looking to diversify from China. For a moment, India seemed poised to become the world's next manufacturing giant. But the reality proved much tougher. Factories faced frequent power outages, sometimes forcing production to halt entirely. Roads and ports, still catching up to the country's ambitions, couldn't handle the massive cargo volumes needed for global-scale operations. Supply chains, which are the lifeblood of manufacturing, often broke down in the most unexpected ways. Even when production ran, regulatory hurdles loomed. Sudden fines, unclear tax requirements, and last-minute policy changes created uncertainty. What was supposed to be a supportive environment sometimes felt like navigating a minefield. The impact was dramatic. Foxconn's retreat triggered a chain reaction. Suppliers, subcontractors, and smaller OEM partners, many of whom had invested alongside Foxconn, pulled out. Thousands of jobs were lost, and billions in future investment plans evaporated. The optimism of Make in India collided with a harsh reality. Ambition alone cannot substitute for reliability and execution. The takeaway: India has the vision, population, and resources to become a global manufacturing hub. But until infrastructure, policy consistency, and trust are fully aligned, foreign companies will remain cautious. Potential is not enough. What the world needs is performance, and right now, India still has some catching up to do. Foxconn's decision to return to China wasn't just about moving buildings or production lines, it was about regaining control. After years of trying to make things work in India, the company chose stability over uncertainty, experience over potential, and execution over experimentation. This shift sends a powerful message. Global supply chains aren't built on cheap labor alone. They rely on infrastructure that works, a skilled workforce that can solve problems quickly, reliable logistics, and governments that create predictability, not obstacles. Vision and ambition are important, but without execution, they remain just ideas on paper. Apple's quiet realignment reinforced the lesson. If the world's most valuable tech company struggles to maintain operations in India, smaller players face even greater risks. Diversification is appealing, but at the end of the day, reliability and trust are what sustain global manufacturing. For viewers, this story is a wake-up call. The next time you pick up your smartphone, open your laptop, or drive an electric vehicle, remember the billions of decisions, risks, and strategies behind its creation. Each product carries the weight of infrastructure, policy, talent, and trust, often far more than the price tag suggests. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We'll keep bringing you the real stories behind global business shifts, supply chain strategies, and the hidden forces shaping the products we rely on every day. The world of manufacturing is changing, but as Foxconn's story shows, some lessons never go out of style. Execution, reliability, and trust always win in the end.